Hi guys, this is Pill Eater. I'm joined today is with Matt Bullerman. Hi Matt.
Hello.
You know, I guess we were supposed to do something actually a few months back, but because of schedules and because where you are, it's kind of hard to get in touch. But I got in touch with you through another friend of Harlan Venison and whatnot. So, are you friends with him, Marlon Venison?
Very good friends. We went to college together. We lived together, and we also know the gangster Bolshevist guys, if you know them.
I sort of do. Isn't it like Daryl or something? I forgot. I think some of the gangster Bolsheviks were once on the Stark Truth radio program, but sort of, but not really. But there are some gangster Bolsheviks that do like my work, and they're often on YouTube. But I kind of don't know much about their whole background and philosophy, really.
So, what is your work about? I mean, your site says Aryanism.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot to work from that because, well, as an introduction for myself, my website is www.asianarianism.com, and it's a project, an avant-garde project by me and a few other friends. And it's basically this ideology and project where I try to have a bicultural bond between some of the whites and Asians that are kind of in the Western world and just try to find unity through that. And of course, there's a lot of, as you know, on the internet, there's that alt-right imagery being played. And of course, with the word like Aryanism, it'll flirt with that. So it makes it very esoteric, but interesting at the same time. But yeah, that's kind of what my whole project is about, for lack of a better term, Asian Aryanism. But, I mean, what are your political persuasions?
I don't really. Can you narrow down the question? What do you mean by that?
I mean, what is your association with politics? And your interest, and your friendship with Harlan Venison, and what kind of you do on the side? What do you actually do most of the time?
Honestly, I just try to escape it all, which is, I don't know if it's a good strategy or a bad strategy, but yeah, and just being from America, there's a lot of prejudice that works in all directions, not just, whites hating blacks, but blacks hating whites and so forth. And it's a messy situation. And, I was to try to explain to people, like, the perceived hierarchy is whites at the top, blacks at the bottom, Asians in the middle. But from what I can tell is, people want equality, but the way they want equality is to restructure the whole hierarchy where, blacks are at the top, whites are at the bottom, and Asians are still in the middle. And I teach some of my Chinese students who are going to, American schools. I say, well, it's kind of unfair, already you're going to a foreign country and you're somewhat in the bottom of the social hierarchy. That's really not fair to you. But, I have to sort of see what they think. Some of the students seem to agree with me. Some of them, after coming back from America, like, for instance, I teach one student, he kind of like he tans his skin all the time, and he's really into basketball, and he basically is a Chinese Uyghur, but it's a little bit more complicated because he's actually from China, and he's trying to be black.
How long have you been teaching in China for, or been in China?
About 4 years.
I'm actually thinking and considering about going to teach in Japan or Korea or even China for that matter. I actually might do Japan, but it's something I would consider the teaching English as a foreign language. But that's it. That's very interesting because I have other Chinese friends who are very obsessed with basketball, but to the point of tanning the skin dark. That's pretty funny actually.
Yeah, I mean, if you like to express your political views, I mean, in China, there's, I don't know about Japan or Korea, but we have this impression that China is very much against freedom of speech, and they are in certain ways. But for the everyday person, I mean, it's in my job, I actually feel like I have total freedom to speak the truth as I see it, and I don't have to worry about losing my job or saying something unpopular and getting fired. So I think it's a really good outlet, and just a lot of people
Absolutely.
never really do that. Do you have any sort of apprehensions about just taking the plunge and just teaching abroad?
Well,
What's your
yeah,
which
that's
yeah.
interesting because it was only a few weeks ago I was talking to another man by the name of John K. Press, and he blogs with his own culturist website. We're good friends now, but he teaches in South Korea, and of course he's being politically incorrect, and there are actually some, of course, Western people are trying to kick him out, but it's just not possible in that spectrum of being teaching in South Korea because most Koreans don't care. And so I think that's interesting. I mean, how would you contrast that whole Chinese culture with American culture, and what reflections have you made on that, and kind of if what are kind of the benefits of staying in China as well?
Well, if there's some bad deals out there, which certainly scared me off from the beginning. But if you know what you're doing, you can actually find some niches because if everyone assumes it's a bad job, then they're going to need people, and then they're going to make the jobs a little bit better. So yeah, if you can find your own niche, it's actually a really good place to work. And so there's another thing I noticed is that sometimes what a culture says about itself is actually the opposite of reality. So, a lot of times in America, they're all about freedom, freedom of speech. And what I found is that, that just allows them to take away more freedoms because people say we're free anyway, and they take away more freedoms. So some of the stereotypes regarding China I found right immediately are untrue. I mean, a lot of people, there's this general feeling that you can, ride in the back of a pickup truck and not get a ticket, or pick a flower from a public park and not get fined. It can be kind of an ugly thing because you have people, smoking everywhere and peeing on the street, but it's also a freedom thing. I mean, if I want to take a piss, I can just take a piss. I don't have to worry about like, am I going to get $100 fine?
Well, that's just like how I guess the old cliche is Indians shitting in the street or something like that. It's more, especially the point in China that if, especially if you're going to buy eggs, hopefully that the eggs are not like bombs or made of toxic or something like that. But
I,
I understand. Yeah.
I think that's the main point with the freedom of speech is that, this country is jumping ahead so quickly that they don't have time to police, what I say, whatever. Of course, they would like to, but it's basically just like uh, they don't have all their ducks in a row necessarily regarding every domain of life. So in that sense, there might be more freedom for the everyday citizen. Again, not so much if you're a politician or something like that.
Do you have views associated with Harlan Venison, or are you still in connection with him?
We talk pretty infrequently, and that's significant because he's very intellectual, and his views evolve a lot. And if you don't keep in constant contact with him, it's hard to know if you're on the same page or not. Um, so I really don't know. We really don't talk that frequently. But the whole thing was it's just we both went to Rutgers, and there's this very turbulent environment where there's a lot of reverse racism and things like that. And so if you're trying to identify a problem in society and try to solve it, because why else are we here? That was definitely very salient in our experience.
Have you blogged, or you're just more of an escapist and trying to escape from anything and would like to kind of, because you said you were an escapist, but have you ever did anything on the internet of blogging or YouTubing or tweeting?
I'm not very active on the internet. There's certain reasons for that. One reason is, you need to take some time and absorb information before you you recapitulate it, and also if you don't have any power, what's the point? And it can also be kind of self bad for yourself. It's like the thing where, in school they tell you if you have a problem with government or government policies, you should write a letter. And then some of my peers were like, no, you shouldn't write a letter because then that alerts you, it associates you with the threat or something like that.
What did you study in college?
I studied linguistics.
Ah, and so it was more, yeah, because I studied I was a mixed bag. I studied like Asian studies and English and a bunch of liberal studies, arts, and hopped around everywhere. I think that's interesting. You of course know like fluent Chinese, right?
I'm pretty fluent for simple situations and whatever I need to do in China because they really don't speak any English,
Ah,
contrary to what I'm told.
so it's more like you
But
speak Chinese everywhere.
yeah, well, you have to. They don't speak English. But even that leads me to the question about you is, you started this blog and you said you almost majored in Asian studies and you're thinking about going to Asia. So demographic wise, like there's obviously a big, correlation between, half, Asian mixed marriages and stuff like that. So.
Well, yeah, that is a very interesting thing to think about because I think the TEFL programs, the teaching English as a foreign language, is I think becoming rapidly bigger because of our economic situation, where America seems to be more like it's becoming sort of like China, and more white Americans are pretty much escaping kind of the decadence of the West in favor of different lands where they can have some kind of power, where ironically it has been other non-whites into America and they basically feed off all the resources while it seems like the globalist whites want to move somewhere else and camp elsewhere. And as that happens, you have other, whites moving into China, Korea, or even Japan for the biggest matter. And I do you think there's some kind of cultural rift that is happening and that it's becoming more accessible to whites, or is things are pretty much in check and things have never been that crazy and things are still relatively the same outside of America?
So what are your views on white privilege?
Well, I think first for white privilege, I do believe in some aspect of that there are, of course, socioeconomic classes, and of course, it's unfortunate because there has been a war among the lower or middle white class. Because I think in the past, probably around the 1960s or 70s, pretty much the white liberal class declared war on the white people who just want to live their life and they just are animals. And so what we've been seeing is policies in America and cultural norms where the expectation for a white person should make six figure or six or pretty much more than that, probably eight figures if they can. It seems like it's impossible, but more like that. You can't be trailer trash in today's economy, and it's unfortunate because there's been this, as you know, Donald Trump pretty much won the election, and that shows you that there is still a striving white, middle class, and it's there. But but the expectation is if you're white, you should be on a trust fund, you should travel the world, and you should be intellectual and be a referee to a game nobody's playing. And so if you want to put white privilege in that area, it seems to me that it's just a natural progression of thinking that whites have an expectation to be this elitist class. But then again, there's been very criticism of white privilege because white privilege was really much popular in the 90s, and at the end of the mid-2000s, it's kind of futile because what happens is white liberals say they have white privilege, but they just say it so they can shut other non-whites up and let them do stuff white people like, as in Christian Lander's book that was released in 2008. So, I mean, I just think it's kind of futile now, white privilege, and what's really happening is just anti-white rhetoric. It's just, well, if you're white, cisgendered male, we want you dead. The narrative is pretty much anti-white now as I look upon it.
Okay, well, that's definitely well thought out. The way I have to explain it is if you're already rich, then it maybe helps to be white, but if you're poor, then it hurts to be white.
Well, yeah, I mean, it shows you that there's high expectation for a certain there's a certain stereotype that goes about that. Exactly. If you're white, then it assumes that you should do things at certain ages and certain activities, but it's just not true, and people are caught into this weird world of generalizations. And again, I think what's happening, as you've seen with the alt right on the internet, that there is a need for as a lack of a better term, I guess, ethno-nationalism or a post-liberal system that isn't neoliberal and about anti-racism, and rather a system that kind of respects people's self-determination, liberty, and freedom, and preferring with people like themselves, but as well getting narratives out there where if you have bicultural or multicultural people, they should belong into certain they should belong in certain sections, and that's why I have my own Asianarian thing where I argue for biculturalism, and that maybe not exactly ethno states, but our own interests. It sounds like post-libertarian, but there must be a system that's not egalitarian or ultra-nationalist, ethno-nationalism, and I think that is pretty much being developing, as you see on the YouTube world of people who are, I guess, quote unquote, red pilled and a part of the whole YouTube personality and being skeptical of the whole political correctness, I guess.
Yeah, they're very honest. There's a lot less bullshit when things are anonymous.
Oh
But
yeah, what's
can I
that?
ask you a question? Is a lot of white males are breeding, if I may use that verb, with Asian females and creating half Asian babies. So, what do you think the role is of that shifted demographic of these half Asian babies entering the world?
Well, I actually mean to write a Q&A book or some kind of. I mean, I write articles on my website, but I mean to like compile them into a print-on-demand book or something like that. But that's interesting because I remember, that's kind of one of my issues that I've actually been studying about, and there's no denying the fact that in the American situation, I've been saying this a lot, is that the multicultural paradigm is just like white privilege is this thing to make white liberals, make white liberals promote it and propagate it to make non-whites, to shut up about claims of racism, so white people could do sweple things and do things unapologetically. They're just proxies for them not to be evil sinners. And so what actually is happening is that white people only promote multiculturalism for a bicultural interest of whites and Asians only. And it seems that blacks and Mexicans and Indians, whatever, they seem to be there's the dark lower brown skinned Brazilian underclass, and you might see an upper class of white Asian Jewish aristocracy or something. There's some internet meme online like that with the pyramid, but it's
Uh,
but but the point is, it seems to me that white people like to use the multicultural paradigm, and they actually only prefer the interest of Asians. As if you look at most dating applications like Tinder or Bumble or whatever, the most highest preference is white male on Asian female. And Pew Research Center says in 2015, the biggest multiracial group by 15% was white and Asian, from both white male, Asian female to Asian male, white female ratio. And none of these people who are in these marriages and having Eurasian children are asking if they have any future for their children. They just assume they're going to be white. Or they basically, the ideal to be white today means to be egalitarian, neutered of white racial consciousness, and you have to think of yourself as an individual, because you can't, otherwise, if you have racial consciousness, you're insensitive, you're evil. And white people trip on this because they think how good society is, so they let other non-whites come in just of this Christian ethos to seem that they're too good. And I've had some situations where you ask a white male and they have an Asian wife, and you tell them this, but they don't want to say, well, I didn't marry my wife because she's Asian, because she's an individual, and my children are going to be individual as well. But that's just signaling to me that they just want their children to be white. And it goes along with what's popular in the white nationalist world of the amnesty argument, whether the kids should be white or Asian. There is no third position. You choose a side. And YouTubers like Roaming Millennial, who's Eurasian, you know, she's more white than she is. If Greg Johnson of Countercurrents asks her question about, racial consciousness, she'll say, why does that matter? Why is she saying that? Well, it's because right now white people in white culture don't want to have racial consciousness. They want to pretend it's not there, and they want to pretend that they're egalitarian individuals. I think that's an extremely destructive behavior. And what's happening is it's not exactly genocide, but an accidental creation of Asian Aryanism, and that it has to have this cuckery has to stop in favor of a collectivist identity, or at least being aware of these things and having the avocation of people's own right and getting rid of these liberal egalitarian fraud philosophies, which has pretty much been debunked by libertarian philosophers like Murray Rothbard and the whole alt-right. So it's really about cowardly bourgeois white people, and about trying to confront them with these issues they want to live. Because if you live your life as an individual, you're not a true parent. You're not caring for the future of your children, and you're pretty much you don't have answers. And this is all about caring about the future, really. That's how I see it as.
So then your viewers are going to be very curious about your own personal wife and to-be and dating preferences and personal demographics. So how do you account for that?
What do you mean, like kind of like when people discriminate and they choose their wife or something like that?
No,
or?
I mean, like you're in the spotlight. Like people are, if you say that, then people are going to pay extra you and your dating preferences and stuff.
Well, it's like people don't like it when you're honest, because I guess when you're honest, people just don't like it, because you basically tell the elephant in the room, and people would rather pretend that anything is random and not absolute. People don't like to think about death. People don't want to think about, especially the European world, they don't want to think about death. And if they think about death, then that's it. It's a destiny. And if you have a certain destiny outcome, you actually are healthy, because you have your outcome in front of you. And so people want to pretend as if they're just consumer individuals, and anything can be consumed, and it just paths are different. And people think you're closed-minded if you choose a certain path. But the truth is, people discriminate. People have ultimate choices, and people live very similar lives. And calling out what is only natural, I don't think it's only offensive to the normie who assumes that you basically call out that their life is cliche, and every other person is living that same exact life. So I think, as for in the Asian Aryan Discord, there are other geeky white guys from the ages of late teenagers to mid early 20s that have Asian girlfriends, or at least want Asian wives. And you have actually, you actually have the same thing from the Asian male side as well, with white females as well. And there are a lot of white girls that prefer to be in interest with Asian males as well. But the thing is, it seems to be that there's this focus, and the powerful word they like to use is the fetish word. That seems to be what has happened. They didn't have an answer for this big uprising of white and Asian, so now what we've heard in the last 4 years, that it's ultimately a fetish, and that it's actually worse than being called a racist, because you have a fetish. But as I will counter that, it's interesting to note that white nationalists, if you think about them, they have a fetish for white women, if that's possible. Because white nationalism fetishes over a white society and the interest of their women, and they believe that's ultimately natural, and you don't know any better, and therefore you should fetishize over white women of your own race. And of course, some white nationalists will argue and say that's not true, it's health, and fetish is an abnormal obsession with something. But I guess there's nothing more abnormal than being obsessed about thinking, and being meta about things. When you're being meta, that you see a large numbers of a bicultural interest of white and Asians, then it's pointing out the elephant in a room. People assume that they just want to breathe rather than think about things. But only, I guess, geniuses and intellects think about these things, is because that's what people prefer. And I think it's really just a preference and a natural cultural thing that is happening in an age of death and decadence, where the only normie society is a bicultural one.
Do you think it's an upgrade if a white male chooses an Asian female and vice versa?
It's not exactly an upgrade, but it's just a preference that because of, I guess, rampant feminism and the individual and hardcore nature of the consumer society the West is in, the poisonous attitudes, the spiritual warfare of left wing, right wing, everything that treats people as individuals and not collective and family. I think of it as an escape for whites and Asians. It's a bridge. And I think Julius Evola has pretty much said that right. And when he was talking about East and West, that there's now this bridge, or as Samuel Huntington says, there's a clash of cultures. And one of the clash of cultures that has happened is when the bridge of whites and Asians have made, and whites brought along their burden of the Cold War, and Asians trying to overcover their war with one another. It seems that the white Asian thing is pretty much the most peace you can get in today's globalized chaos. And that is basically an answer for all MGTOW and disgruntled people on the alt-right, and pretty much the natural way of life if you were to experience today away from everything that is crude. Again, I don't think it's an upgrade or some supremacy statement, but it's rather an accidental route that is happening. And if this Eurasian thing is made, or white Asian bond, then there should be catering towards that.
Do you think it's a downgrade?
No, I don't think it's a downgrade at all. I think it's just one. I mean, I'm not a human biodiversity person or a race realist, but it seems to me that it was created. I mean, if you look at Creole people in Louisiana, that was basically when two people were congregating, and those Creole people were a byproduct of that. And there are other races too that seem to be of social conditioning, and I would think on a large number of whites and Asians would be a part of that social conditioning as well. No,
So your view on race is simply that, like, if you were born Asian, you would be intellectually the same, only your hair texture and color would be different, assuming that you were Caucasian or black or something other than Asian.
well, I mean, I don't want to sound to be an egalitarian on race, but I do believe there are different IQ levels, but I do believe that there is a certain bond with people of interest. I understand that too, that it might be well that a dark-skinned person would have preference towards another dark-skinned and a light-skinned person would have preference towards another light-skinned person. And so I think that I don't want to say of the social blank state thing, but I want to say that there certainly is bonds, and people who make the best bonds have, those parties. I could say in my own words, I think, but yeah, there's certainly a lot to talk about on the issue. So,
Do you have any more questions for me?
I'm thinking. Damn, I'm thinking. I kind of ran out on my outline. Damn it. I mean, no, let me just think right now. I mean, I'm looking at my outline thing. I mean, I could ask about, well, I asked about where you're from, your friend with Harlan Venison. I mean, you don't blog, so
Yeah.
you have nothing, I mean, if you want, we could just end it there. I mean, if you're very fine, because it's like I hardly know anything about you, and Harlan Venison only pretty much told me to get in contact with you to have a good conversation. Show,
Well, how did you meet him?
Well, we actually met up. I was always a huge fan of him. I discovered him on the Stark Truth Radio, and I got in contact with him through a Discord. And as I was writing books, I was reading his books. We made up a meetup in Philadelphia, and it was really nice. And since then, we've pretty much remained in contact, and send stuff each other and send books back and forth. And yeah, which has a really good friendship. And recently I did a Unite the Right podcast with him because I was there at Unite the Right, and
Where Richard Spencer got punched?
no, that was that was Trump's inauguration. This was a week ago. Unite the Rights, but yeah, no, but I was on Venison's channel just to talk about my experience there. It's on his YouTube, but Venison's a really cool guy. I think there's a lot to say about him. So yeah.
Yeah, we went train hopping together around the United States and saw a lot of crazy things. And he told me about his travels in Europe and Estonia. And Estonia seems he said it was really nice. And then I come here and it is nice. People don't have any sort of conception of these politics that we take so personally in America. It's a whole world. Here, it's completely foreign to them. But economically speaking, I mean, when you think of Estonia, you think of some impoverished, weird, esoteric Eastern European nation, and really, it's just like people are hanging out, and they just life is really easy. So, yeah, definitely in other countries, the life is at a different pace, and would consider if you like, the quiet life. It's definitely a good strategy to consider venturing abroad, even though it's a bit stressful. But at first, if you don't know what you're doing. But you said you're interested in Japan.
Well, no, I'm actually. It's funny you said you were train hopping. I mean, I'm not a train hopper myself, but were you interested in the whole like punk or anarchist or far left lifestyle?
No, it wasn't the lifestyle oriented. For me, sad to say, it was more of a just. Was interested in to see how it works, and I was between jobs. It was perfect for me. For Harleem, it was out of desperation. I mean, it's just how he survived. So I was sort of just it's kind of like a vacation, but yeah, you get to see how it works. We went to Georgia, Florida, visited the South, and I thought the South is actually, speaking of ironies, like the South is actually. It was more racially divided, but it was more like people were united under the concept of being from the South. So they were actually friendlier. The pace of life was slower. It was more affordable, and so people have this general impression of the South as being backwards or something. But if I had to relocate and come back to the United States, I would actually prefer to be in the South.
No, I love Nashville. Nashville is great. I mean, some of the parts of Tennessee is really beautiful. I was just there like 3 weeks ago down south with a couple of friends carpooling. But I find that interesting. The whole train hopping thing. So you don't come from any persuasion of like far left politics or little punk rock music or anything like that.
No, I'm definitely against the left from what I've seen. I was born and raised to be in total support of the left, mainly from my sister, who's very, very. She's from Harvard and she's mixed race. She's my half sister, and she raised me to be really left. But then I found out very quickly that the left is against straight white males and stuff. It's not very
Wow.
comforting. I mean, there's some good people, but just. Just because you're against one problem doesn't mean you have to be in support of another group. I mean, I'm not necessarily a far right person. Like I said, when I talk to Americans that come to China to teach, I'm just like, dude, like you're misinterpreting everything I say. I'm not just because I say something that's not pro left doesn't mean I'm pro right. It's when you ask me about Trump, it's like it's not my country.
Well, it's weird because I try to stay avoid from the left wing right wing dichotomy because it really is a white people thing. I think it's really important to have white racial consciousness and understand what white people are going through. And I think most non-whites don't understand that. So when a white person purges another white person for having right wing ideals, this is just a petty white people fight. It really is. And whites really think non-whites are going to be engulfed and whitewashed into the white people worlds of the spiritual world versus the French Revolution and the reactionary, right wing of the monarchy. And as people said, I look at it even as this weird white people obsession with transhumanism, that whites are obsessed with creating this transhumanist individual. That's why they're obsessed with people like Toni Morrison and Octavia Butler. They think of them as these black people trans, lesbian, black people that think like Socrates, and it's really ridiculous. And the only people that can really fight against that in the past 90s were probably the reactionaries, who pretty much said that the French Revolution was wrong in Western history, and that what should be happen is pretty much now we see the alt-right, or this trad kind of party that's trying to say stop, or at least saying that there's some no cultural nature within whites, maybe pathological altruism or some kind of Christian ethos within whites, that basically we get caught up with our own actions, and we don't ever question our own thinking, and we think we're doing right, but we end up doing what's wrong. And I think that is unfortunate, because you could also say that, like, it's just like Rudyard Kipling had said. Rudyard Kipling said that the white man's burden pretty much is twofold. I mean, the first one is that should white people around the world patrol the entire earth and enrich non-whites' life with white culture so they can think and act like white people, or should white people just build bigger fences and leave everyone in their own ethno-states and let human biodiversity flourish? So I think Rudyard Kipling's white man's burden question has never been answered, because I think white people are having a struggle with themselves and about how Western civilization and how that power is about. But for one thing for certain, I will say, is that in the 1980s, this whole French philosophy, cuckoo postmodernism, basically tells whites to be self-hating, but at the same time love white culture. And it's really a paradox. I would think English studies right now is the most hypocritical higher education thing out there, because it really is white nationalist studies with the side of, oh, we're not really white nationalists, we're just sarcastic and ironic. That's what Derrida said, and it's really foolish. And that's how I look at the things right now. I just think maybe there is this spiritual war, and there needs to be some future understanding of that. And I always think there will be generation wars, as in Chinese civilization, it's just been, generation warfare. But I don't know. For the European mind, it's different. So
a lot of your responses seem to be centered around your worldview and specific knowledge base and history. So I can't really respond, but I have my own worldview as well, centered around my own knowledge basis. So if you have any major questions,
can you explain it? Can you talk about it for a bit?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that for instance, history. Like, I'm not that well versed in history, but when people are put in isolation, they develop their own unique ways of figuring things out. So that you can picture different snowflakes or different key structures, like different. So what I'm saying is, I think if you ask some major questions that you often get from your podcast interviewees, you might yield some interesting results.
Oh yeah.
Because I can't really comment on the stuff you're saying. It sounds very, but I'm not familiar with that research area.
Oh yeah. I'm just saying in my own words, But I'm just saying in my own words and stuff like that. But stuff like that. But
no, I'm just saying if you ask some common questions, then you might be surprised about the different diversity of results that you get from different people, because they all have different worldviews.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what exactly would your own worldview be about?
I don't know how to give you a keyword, but it'd be fairly unique because I've been living in isolation. So.
Oh yeah, the escapism part. That's interesting.
It's not real. I wouldn't label it as that. I wouldn't label it as escapism necessarily. But certainly when it's a true measure of objective reality when you have two different people living in isolation and they come up with the same exact conclusion. You can be pretty sure that they're looking at the same objective reality. So, is there any sort of common question that you would ask any interviewee that you would want to ask me?
Well, let me think about that. Most of this is improvised, so I guess I would ask about where do you see the future of people going? Are you more of an optimist or a pessimist?
Well, I'm more of a realist, so if optimism is more successful, then I would choose that. If pessimism is more successful, I'd choose that. But I would describe myself pessimistically as more of a pessimist who has become an optimist because, like lately I've just been noticing that in terms of the power laws, like if you have an optimal result in mind, then the result that you're thinking of will become reality. So maybe I'm getting older, but it just optimism obscures your true understanding of the world, but it's just more logical because it leads to a happier reality.
Mm. Well,
But
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that's interesting. I think I pretty much want to conclude this podcast. I think I've pretty much covered everything on that behalf. But is there anything else you'd like to say?
Nothing I want to say. I'm just really interested in your views and why you like why you have this website and
well,
like that.
I mean, it's whenever I'm on someone else's podcast, I tend to do that. So, but if I was to say it quickly about my own project, it's pretty much finding. Again, it's a project, and it's pretty much an interesting thing I'm doing. I mean, I've written 2 books, I have a few albums out, and I blog, and it's really a collective, you could say, of a one-man project, but also a very sincere thing about how I view the world and how other people as well we view it too, and just want to get that out there before someone else goes on my. I've made up Asian Aryanism in one night while talking to a friend, and I've always been saying forever whether I should change the word. But since the word is now branded and people meme it into existence, I have to stick with it. So unless I make a new website, I'm definitely going to use Asian Aryan again and again. But I think there's a lot to say on the matter. It's definitely, you have to be a part of the culture to really experience it. That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, all right. Sounds like a good name. I mean, it's a loaded word, but it's actually a very positive word. It's got a very bad rap, but
yeah,
this is an
Aryanism.
ideal. We all strive for an ideal. So.
If I can ever think of that new word, it'd be I don't know what exactly, but I think it works. But it's
Eugenic.
Eugenics. I don't know. I don't know if it's exactly eugenics, but all right. But it's nice talking to you, Matt.
Yep. All right. Well, talk to you later, maybe.